Hi, let's do problem number 9 from chapter 5, SQL Merge, SQL Server by Merge. So this looks like, generally could look to you like a problem with a subquery first, and we could do the same, get the same results with a subquery. But we're going to use material from this chapter, which means using over and partition. The last line tells me that I need to see individual invoices for each vendor, but also I need to see the total per vendor and the count per vendor and the average per vendor. So we need to, first of all, read this enough times so that it makes sense. And second, keep this in mind, so open your book and look at this while you are watching this video or doing it on your own, really. All right, let's see what kind of tables I need. I need invoice data, and I believe I don't need anything else, so I don't even need a join here. I believe invoices would have all the data that we need. So let's look at the invoices. Invoice number, invoice date, and vendor ID. We are going to do the over clause with partition by vendor ID in the end to get these guys, these three columns. And that's about it. So we're ready. Good to go. I keep looking at the columns that I need, and I'm just starting from scratch. Even though we could do this one, maybe I'll do this one using a query editor. So all I need is invoices, and close that. I will need invoice ID, vendor ID, and to get to the invoice total, sum of invoice totals, I will need invoice totals. And then the aggregate ones, sum of invoice totals per vendor, some count of invoices per each vendor, and average of invoice totals. So it's all calculated from either number of invoice IDs or the total. Okay. All right, so this is like a bare bones beginning of my query. And now I need to do the interesting part, which is the vendor total. Invoice total for each vendor. So I'm going to call it as vendor total. And what I'm going to take is sum invoice total over partition by vendor. And now we need to understand why there is a bunch of underlined columns here. So we're still working with AP. That is good. And I'm missing a comma here, evidently. Partition over this and some invoice from invoices. Oh, that's one. Okay, here we go. Let's run and see invalid partition by vendor ID. Let's retry that. So vendor total 34 and the total vendor ID 34, vendor total for this vendor is 1200, and so on. So vendor ID 37, there are 3 invoices apparently, and this is the total for them. So very similarly, we have to do the other two. Vendor count invoices. So I'm gonna do count invoice ID, and over the same pattern, and I don't need to forget the comma, and this is as vendor count. See that it works. Vendor count should really correspond to the number of times we have it in our table. Here they are. And the very last one, I don't remember this thing, so vendor average. Okay. So we need to divide one by the other. So this is, me copy paste and modify, which is usually toxic, but I think I can make it happen, like everyone does. Think that until they run into trouble doing that. Over partition vendor ID as vendor average. There is actually a, now that I thought about it, there is an average function, I'm pretty sure, in SQL. So this should work and provide values. Invoice ID is invalid. In either the aggregate function. All right, invoice ID. No, everything is fine. I know. So we can, what we can do is just do average, average of invoice total. All right, so we can check that this works. Here is my average, vendor average, and whenever I think I'm done with the problem, it's a good idea to go back and check the requirements of the problem. So should include individual invoices. That's why I didn't just do group by. Everything before that could be done with group by. And this problem could actually be solved with a subquery and a join statement. With a subquery, the joining two select statements really. Yep, I guess that's it, and this is our outcome. So for every invoice ID, I have all this data, and you can see how much repetition there is. So for the same vendor ID, in order to have every one of these invoices mentioned here, I have to, if I want this data, it's going to be the same per vendor ID because it was aggregated per vendor ID.